Let's enlarge the screen. Are they though? Right, so Canaletto and Lowry. Two very different artists, perhaps, from two very different times and countries from across the world. I'm going to have Jackie still not here, so I'm going to have to put the...
She's still poorly though.
No, well, yeah, but she is in, which she should be. But I'm going to have the... I'll have to have the... I can't see the cameras on there because I'm having to do... I've got 5 separate programs on, so I can't see that. And the shop, so let's put the shop on because she said she was coming in ASAP 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, but that might be ASAP.
Well, yes. So Canaletto, not really called Canaletto. That was not his name. He was called Giovanni Antonio Canal.
Oh, couldn't
That's not quite so nice, is it? Not if you go around painting canals.
No, and he was the son of the painter Bernardo Canal, hence him being called Canaletto, Little Canal. You get that a lot in Italian, where a lot of artists actually are called Little something or
Like
Little
Junior,
Barrel. I
isn't
mean,
it?
one I can't remember which one it was called, Little Barrel, because he was quite rounded.
Was that Botticelli? Botticelli?
Might have been Botticelli.
I know there was one,
Little
yeah.
Barrel
I wonder what canal means then
in
in
Italian.
Because clearly
Jackie will know.
canal has been called after whatever canal means.
Yeah,
What do you mean? It meant like a channel maybe.
maybe. Yeah,
Probably.
Yeah, it might be channel.
I'll have to have a look when I can access my phone or when Jackie's in, because she'll know, because she knows Italian. And he actually was an apprentice with his father and his brother, theatrical scene painting, you know, so that's,
I knew.
so they did already that.
makes sense looking at the landscape.
Yes. I mean, he designed sets for operas, and Vivaldi, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And then in 1718, Canaletto returned to Rome. And during his time in Rome, he worked with his father producing scenery for 2 operas, which were performed during the carnival season of 1720. And he was inspired by the Roman vedutista Giovanni Paolo Panini and started painting the daily life of its city and people. So it's basically daily life of city, of people doing their thing all the way.
Like Lowry.
Exactly like Lowry. And after returning home from Rome in 1719, he began in his typographical style that we're familiar with. His first known and signed and dated work is 1723, which is in a private collection. And he studied with another artist, Luca Carlevaris, who was a well-regarded painter of urban cityscapes. And he rapidly became his master's equal because of all of the experience he already had. And it's quite interesting, really. Much of Canaletto's early work was painted from nature, so as was, differing from the then customary practice of completing paintings in the studio. So Canaletto painted outside, and some of his later works do revert to studio work. So it depends, really. The jury's out with the camera obscura, and I think the jury's out only because people still think of it as massively cheating, and art historians don't like that idea. Obviously, his paintings are highly accurate. That's what everyone knows. They're almost photographic, aren't they? And I mean, let me just look at that one. You know, they're quite big, 1m24 by 1m63, so almost the size of the board, so a little bit bigger than what we can see on the screen here.
Having been a theatrical set designer, he'd have to be able to do
accurate.
accurately with a ruler.
Yeah,
And also,
With big size.
yeah,
big size, work big.
They'll make little models to, for the actors to look at. So
Yes.
it's definitely technical drawing. In a way.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, using a camera obscura doesn't mean you can't draw.
No.
No.
It just means if you're doing a painting like this a year, it would take you a year to draw it out, let alone paint it, working with oils.
Yeah.
It's the tourist industry, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How can we produce these? For all these
Produce
different
original paintings
styles?
quick.
Yeah.
So he did own a camera obscura, but some art historians say he used it as inspiration. He used it to gain inspiration from, rather than using it for his painting. And I think that's just a load of nonsense, to be honest. If you're going to use it, you're going to use it, aren't you? You can say you can. I take inspiration from the sheets of image trace that we use. You know what I mean? I think
Because the present day historians don't want to say it was painting by numbers.
Well, no, exactly. And to be honest, nearly everything was back then. Artists just used whatever was available to help them get the work done quicker because they needed the money. You like to think of artists. This idea of starving artists it's a brand new notion, really, in our lifetime rather than any other lifetime. They were not starving artists. Some of them were impoverished, often through their own personality and mistakes. It wasn't through to lack of skill. And as an artist today, will use whatever technology is available to them to get the job done quick, because people only care about the finished results. They don't care about how you get there.
Artists are by their nature, they're thieves.
Yeah.
Because you don't just look at a piece of paper and conjure it out of your mind. Your mind is informed by what you've seen.
Absolutely, yeah. Exactly. I mean, you're borrowing everything, and also you're borrowing styles, you're borrowing all sorts of things
Those things
that
like
you see.
Damien Hirst and
His
his
dots.
dots, isn't it? Getting other people to do it for him.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
it's-
Yeah, I mean, that's nothing new, because you got Canaletto had his own students who would paint in his style.
Yeah.
And that's why if you look at some paintings, it will say the school of Titian, the school of,
Yeah.
because they haven't got a clue who painted it, and it looks exactly like the artist. So then, you're just getting the job done. And if you've got a team of 20 people and you can, knock up a lot of paintings for tourism, especially in Venice, then if it's by the school of Canaletto, just because it's got Canaletto on it, that's what everybody wanted. It's the name. You're paying for the name and you're paying for an original painting. How long it took, how quickly, nobody cares.
And he would probably done the finishing touches. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
he would,
Because you
exactly.
do that down.
Because when you think about it, if you're doing commercial stuff and you're using a camera obscura, so basically a camera obscura would be, I don't know, 2 foot long, a foot wide, and then you'd put your sheet of paper inside and you'd look down it, trace whatever's in front of you, then you'd move it across, new piece of paper, trace it, move across, trace it. So that would actually mean once you'd taped them together, you've got that outline to do as many paintings from as you want. Then you just trace that onto your canvas, so you've got that. But you could do then maybe not the full scene, you could do 2 of them or 1 of them, and then you've got part of you know what I mean? It's
Or a night scene.
yeah, you could change the weather. If you knew how the sun moved across the landscape, you can change the seasons. You could, because he was known for the flooding of Venice. He noted the flooding. Well, once you've got the landscape that you painted it in summer, you can then add more water and you can paint it when it's flood. You know what I mean? It makes sense when you think about it. So I think he did. Now, this is one of his earlier works, and his early works are his most coveted.
Oh, beautiful.
And one of his early pieces is the stonemason's yard. It's in the National Gallery, and it's just a humble working area of the city, and it's regarded as one of its finest pieces. And I think it's because it's normal.
I was going to say, it's not kind of like,
It's not
Venice
grand.
Yeah, no. It's just normal people doing their thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that Venice?
But how
Oh,
or
it
wherever
was.
it is. It's,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's how it still is.
Yes, yes, it is.
It hasn't changed.
And the curtains, the blinds halfway.
Beautiful
Yeah.
style.
It's the back end of Innis.
I was going to say it looks like St Mark's Basilica there.
Round the back of.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a temporary stonemason's yard at the front, in a rough open space by the Grand Canal known as the Campo San Vidal. Campo, literally field, used in Venice to denote a small open space. Several masons are at work in this picture, carving, ready for maybe the construction of the nearby church of San Vidal, which is immediately behind us, so it's not visible in the painting.
Yeah.
So there's a building going on.
Stonemasons, didn't they? Because
Well, you
every
couldn't
time
carry
they-
it everywhere,
No,
and
just
you've
on
got
the
to
side.
do it to fit the specific windows and the rebates and the doors. So you would have little make. They'd knock up a hut just to keep the stone dry and whatever from the weather and the elements, and then you'd just work away, fit it in, measure it, move it. It makes sense to have that.
It's like we
Oh,
do
so
today,
they-
really.
Yeah.
I've tweeted
Yeah.
now, those are the boats on the canal.
Yes.
I thought they were excavators.
Ah, no, boats on the canal.
It's a bit small, isn't it?
No, they're boats.
Yeah, now I've got
Now
it.
you've got it.
I
You're
can
all right.
I can now see it's the canal. It look,
I thought it was
just
a,
looked like
I
a
thought
bit
it
of.
was a wall.
Yes,
Yes.
it does
Oh,
look like
okay.
a
With
wall.
excavators in front.
It's
of
because
it.
it's all in shadow, isn't it? I think
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Yes, very clever.
So you've got the side of the medieval church of Santa Maria della Carita, constructed in the 1440s, stands on the opposite bank of the Grand Canal, to the left of the facade of the Scuola Grande della Carita. Scuola.
Squall.
Yes. The tower of the church of San Trovaso is visible rising over the rooftops in the distance. So that's the white one, right at the back.
You'll have to persuade Sarah
And these,
to come.
Yeah.
To do the
Yeah, to do the
pronunciation.
pronunciation.
The open shutters, I think it's lovely with the shadow.
It's gorgeous.
You could feel you could
On the
take
left-hand
off.
side, yeah, it's
Very
absolutely
good.
beautiful. It is. And it's like I say to you art students all the time, how important shadows are in making things look three-dimensional. You can see it in practice here. You basically, in addition to all of the architectural details, you've got daily life of Venice, the bit that most people would not want to see when you visit Venice, especially back then. It's probably an early morning. There's a windowsill on the lower left where a cock is crowing. The sun streams in from the left behind the viewer, which is the east. Domestic buildings in poor repair, with the flared Venetian chimney pots, which is very typical of the area. Laundry hanging from the windows, potted plants on balconies. A woman is using a drop spindle to spin thread on a balcony to the right. There. There's just a lot going on. Someone is drawing water from a well in the Campo beside a wooden shed. There's just all sorts of stuff going on in that picture. Yeah, two children are playing in the foreground to the left. One is falling over and urinating, involuntary in surprise. And
Oh, I can't see.
a woman lunges forward to catch him. Another woman looks down from a balcony. You've got a gondola, a canopied cabin passing on the canal with others moored on either bank.
Nice, lovely.
There's a lot in it, and it's a huge picture, but even though it's huge, the detail is still minute. Because even if this picture is only slightly bigger, if it's as big as this screen, that little woman with the drop spindle
It's still teeny.
is not going to be any bigger than your finger,
Yeah.
really, which is tiny to have that kind of information in it.
You can
So it's
see why they love
fascinating.
making jigsaw puzzles out
Oh,
of
goodness
Canaletto.
me,
There's so much
absolutely.
to do, isn't there?
There is, and you'd have to be familiar with the painting
Yeah.
beforehand.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, my
Yeah.
friend makes the jigsaws when you don't have a picture on the front.
Oh yes. Oh, there's those was jigs, isn't
Oh, when
there?
they're looking at it from the other
Where
angle,
you
we've
have to
done
make
some
a
of those.
jigsaw of what the people are looking at on the cover.
Yeah.
The people on the box are looking at something, and you've got to make the scene that they're looking at.
I can't even manage it all.
They are very difficult.
Or if you have the picture on the front and the back.
Oh, blimey.
Yes, yes. Henry's done that before now.
I just get cross with the jigsaw.
I'm rubbish at jigsaws. I've got the patience of a gnat when it comes to jigsaws.
I mean, yeah, I'm not good at jigsaws, to be honest.
Yeah, I get on. I haven't
Now
got
I've
any
got
patience.
one.
So if you're gonna buy a Canaletto, you've got to buy one of his earlier pieces, because that's where the investment is.
Every day off I've had something.
It's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, he painted mainly large-scale landscapes of the pageantry and traditions of Italy. Good atmospheric effects, strong colours, almost a forerunner to Impressionism, really, but a detailed version of that, because you've got the strong colour, the strong shadows, you know, all of that kind of thing. And many of his paintings were sold to Englishmen on their grand tour. First through the agency of Owen Swiney, and later through the banker Joseph Smith. And it was Swiney in the late 1720s that encouraged Canaletto to paint smaller topographical views of Venice. Commercial appeal. See, it's all about the commercial appeal. Tourists and foreign visitors. So Smith was an English businessman and collector living in Venice, appointed by the British consul in Venice in 1744, and he became Canaletto's principal agent and patron, acquiring nearly 50 paintings, 150 drawings, and 15 rare etchings from Canaletto. And then he sold them to King George III in 1763.
Good man.
And then obviously you've got in the 1740s you've got the War of the Austrian Succession, and that kind of disrupted Canaletto's market, because you didn't get as many visitors, British visitors.
The Queen, the old Queen, still owns a lot of Canalettos, because just before COVID we saw an exhibition in Edinburgh at Holyrood.
Oh yes.
The Queen's art exhibits, and there were loads of Canalettos in there. So clearly George III kept them and passed them down.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
So this patron arranged for him to sort of like do a lot of etchings of capricci. Capricci basically is a landscape or cityscape, half real, half made up. So it's based on reality, but it just looks pretty. Lots of buildings. And the returns weren't high enough for profit, and then in 1746 Canaletto moved to London to be closer to his market. You know, if you're getting a load of tourists from England to Italy and they're now not coming, why not move to them? Makes sense, really, doesn't it?
Move to the States to be near your face.
I will never. I have no urge to go.
No, just saying.
Yeah, I have no urge. That's one country in the world I really just don't.
Where?
America, I don't feel like it. I mean, I'm not very good at going anywhere anyway. I don't like flying, so I won't. But, you know, maybe Italy and other places like that I wouldn't mind going. But there's nothing in America that appeals to me to want to go and see. I don't really fancy New York.
I think you would want to go south, you know, to Boston and the Hudson's.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
The artists that were all there.
Yes, absolutely. But I'm not a very travel-y person. I travel with my art rather than with my body. So yeah, there he is moving to England, and he stayed in England. So from, I don't know, 1746 to 1755, and he lived at number 41 Beak Street in Soho. 41 Beak Street in London's Soho district, and he stayed there till 1755, making London views. He did a lot of London views, which we'll have a look at. He was often expected to paint England, though, in the fashion of Venice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit tricky.
Well, it is a little bit, isn't it?
Because it's
Um,
got the skies, have they? Or the light.
No, Not at all. I mean, this is just beautiful. This isn't London, obviously. This is the Basilica of Santa Maria della Salute. And that's a variant of a painting with a larger church tower and an additional building used in the Venetian screen video game Merchant Prince 1.
Look at those reflections, Barry, appertaining to what we've just been
Appertaining to our canoe.
painting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at those reflections. Beautiful.
But it's the light, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the scale that makes it solid. You know, even if you're in Birmingham or any city on a sunny day, it's the light, how it bleaches the brickwork or stonework, and the strong shadows that it's cast that makes everything seem really interesting.
Because
Sort of a gypsy.
that's
Yeah.
sort of, I'd say late morning, early afternoon then, not the
On a Wednesday. And they're not huge pictures either. They're only sort of 49 by 73, so it's smaller than what we can see on the screen. So you can see the amount of detail needed. You know, you'd be using brushes with one or two.
Size of my cooker.
Yes, I see.
Yeah,
So it's not
Really
really
lovely.
hair width bristles.
the Canaletto inspired cooker. How wonderful.
Oh, that's unusual, isn't it?
View of the entrance to the Venetian arsenal.
I haven't seen that before.
Again, not huge,
Unusual, isn't it?
but it is just everyday life in a way. I mean, you can see a bit of a difference there. That's picture postcard, isn't it? If you've been to Venice
Yeah.
in the 1700s, you got to be wealthy, really, and that's a really good. If you're going to take a painting, you'd want something like that because that's what it's like,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's, as a wealthy person visiting Venice, these are the scenes you'd see. You wouldn't be seeing the stonemasons
That's
and the.
what you want to remember, wouldn't it? If you
It's like a postcard,
Yeah,
a
when
very
you-
expensive postcard, but a postcard nonetheless. And then we have the feast day of St. Roch or Roque. So we've got a crowd watching as state dignitaries and foreign ambassadors emerge from the Church of San Rocco on the right. And they've just attended a mass in honour of Saint Roch as a part of the saint's feast day, which was held in Venice every year on the 16th of August to celebrate his role in bringing the plague of 1576 to an end. So we've got the elected head of Venetian state. He's dressed in a golden ermine-lined ceremonial robe, sumptuous draperies. Everybody else is in. Obviously interesting because we've got people facing. Most of the people are facing away from us, so that gives us the impression that we are part of that crowd, immersed in the festivities.
Well, it's like that
It's
chat
a
that we
Frederick.
did the other week.
Friedrich.
Yeah, Friedrich thingy.
Oh, yes, yeah.
looking up.
Yeah,
Nice
absolutely.
one on the rock.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? A feast day to celebrate the ending of the plague.
It's good at people, isn't it? And really, you can't do that with your obscura thing, I just thought.
Well, no. What's interesting is if you look at Canaletto's paintings, you can tell when a camera obscura has been used because the figures in the distance are blobs.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking with your eyes, you turn them into people because you adjust your focus accordingly.
Yeah.
But with a camera obscura, they'd just be as it looked as you look through that lens, and it would distort.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same as if you're looking when we've talked about when you're drawing from a photograph. The difference is, or painting from a photograph, the difference is the background is out of focus, the foreground is in focus.
Yeah.
But if you are sitting, you will look at the background and you will make the background in focus because your vision adjusts. And then when you want to paint the foreground, your foreground is in focus. So you've got everything in focus, and then you then have to work to soften the background or something. Whereas if you're using a camera, it does that for you, and it adjusts the depth of field and all sorts of things. So it's
But
not.
with that picture,
Yeah.
you could have it without the people, so you could have done the picture as a normal
and then
And
added figures in
And yeah, so you could have used the camera obscura
for the
and
architecture.
then had some with people in, some without people in,
Yeah.
and all that kind of thing. So yeah, so I love yeah,
You use it like a template.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Well, that's that building that was in earlier, the religious building that was the edge of it in the other one. So we would have had it a lot. I mean, in you know, you've got certain buildings, haven't you, that tourists would want to see or whatever. So you'd have a lot of pre-drawn sketches and outlines.
That bit on the top just irritates me though.
What, that triangle?
Yes.
Because it's not central.
Yes.
Well, it's probably a building behind.
Yeah, it is, but it
Isn't
just
it does
just,
look weird,
yeah.
doesn't it?
Slightly off centre.
But
Well, it's
sometimes didn't he actually move pieces around there?
sometimes, yeah, he would make the composition better. But actually, Sue, if you look, it's central.
It's central to the picture.
No, when it's central, I think that's an extension.
Oh, okay, yeah,
'Cause
maybe.
look, That is perfect
Ah, yeah.
as the building if you split it there.
Yeah.
And then this, if you add that bit on afterwards, it kind of works,
makes sense,
doesn't
So
it?
doesn't
the two
Yeah.
windows
Yeah.
haven't got a division, have
Yeah.
they?
No, it's not. It's not the same. It's
No.
the same style,
But it's not.
but
yeah,
it's not the
no.
same. And then you've got an archway on that side, but that's triangle above the door echoes the triangle above the.
Ah, yeah, now you've explained it.
So it looks like it's been added on. I don't know the building, but that would make sense as it became more important.
That makes
They'd
sense.
build it, wouldn't they?
No, that just whack it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good.
So yeah, it.
So, now
So
I'm
if
looking
you
at it,
sort
I'm
of.
thinking it needs another bit on the other side now.
Yes, exactly. That's what it should have to even it out. So if I block my little finger because I can over that edge, it looks like quite a nice building actually, with just 2, 4, 6 windows on the top.
Yeah.
It works as a building on its own. So I'd say that's been extended.
Yeah.
To be honest, not that I know the buildings, but that's fascinating. But it's one of those skies again where it's not brooding. And it's not sunny, and it's not grey. It looks a bit like today, but there's that lovely colour in it, isn't there? Because Turner went to Venice, and he had a whole different colour palette than his British colour palette because of the way the light works and the buildings, and you know, that kind of thing.
Mind you, the light for him was good, wasn't it? Down, I went to the Modern Turner.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Down in Margate, and on the end of the harbour there, you could just feel how he was attracted to the skies.
Absolutely. I mean, the reason we paint a lot of Barmouth scenes is because the skies in Barmouth are just the sunsets in Barmouth. Because of the way that the town is arranged and the harbour's arranged and the mountains, the skies are constantly changing, and they're so like those stormy ones, and it's just, I love it.
There's a freshness, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's clear and it feels fresh.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's one that
So this is one that's been slightly altered to make the composition more dramatic. The facade of the house on the far right is at a much sharper angle than it is in reality, and the bridge is closer to us, and the Cannaregio is more open. So he's kind of done a Photoshop, but you wouldn't know. Because even if you've been there, it's everything is there. He's not changed it. He's just manipulated, swung a few bits round, brought a few things.
Fisheye, isn't it? Almost.
It is almost fisheye to try and get the whole scene in. And also,
Maybe wide angle.
yeah, and with the Cannaregio being far more open, if it was too open, he wouldn't have got half the buildings in the picture. So he's just sort of like squinched it in really to make it work as a postcard scene. And also, for someone like me who's never been, I'll take that. It looks real enough to me, and it looks solid, and it's almost like a photograph. So you can tell his tourist ones because they're all around about 45 by 80 centimetres. You know what I mean? They're all, which is still big, but it's sort of,
They're portable, aren't they?
yeah, they are more portable to take with you. The thing is that you can see. I do love Canaletto. I think there's something about them, and Compton Verney they had several Canalettos in their Italian artists exhibition. Gosh, that's got to be going about 5-6 years ago. It was way before COVID, maybe 2016, 2017. And they had Titians and all sorts, and then downstairs they had several Canalettos, but they were really big. I mean, I would say bigger than the whole of the board screen. And they're, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of cityscapes, to be honest. You know, I love a tree. But it's the light, the way he captures light on buildings is really hard. But then it's the shadow. If you look at what brings that out, if you sort of like relax your vision at this scene, you've got your light right followed by your dark on every building. You know, even the tower, we can't see the side of it, but there's a darker bit, so you know that that side's in shadow. Then the building next to it, you've got the arch windows, pale, dark shadow next to it. The bridge is dark, but the buildings behind it are bathed in light, so you've got that contrast. And as you move over, the right side of every building is much darker in strong shadows, so it's that contrast. This on a grey day like today would be boring, because the sky and the stonework and the canal would all be the same colour, and there's no light and there's no dark, so you have to ramp up the saturation and the contrast between the lights and the darks, because it wouldn't work. And that's why when I say to you, like, go darker, that contrast really lifts buildings, it just lifts it off the front, even down to the balconies on that building on the right hand side. The way they're casting shadows, you know how deep they are. You know, it's not just like a little thin ledge, it's slightly wider than that. It's probably about 2 feet deep or something like that, because of the way the shadows are cast. You know where the sun is coming from. So if you were from Italy, you'd know which was east, which was west, you know, all of that kind of thing. And you've got your little gondoliers, and you've got beautiful reflection.
I was gonna say, those reflections are gorgeous.
The detail of everything, because when you get up close to Canaletto, it's like you keep looking and you see something else, and you see something else. And that, I mean, if he did do them himself, it must have taken him ages.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you look at the times for a lot of them, mainly only a year.
Yeah.
And you're working, it is a long time, but when you're working with oils, it dries so slowly, as you know, that you couldn't really, what are you going to do for the 3 weeks that you need to dry before you, I mean, yes, you'd use a marl stick, but you need a massive marl stick on a painting that's 2 meters long, you know what I mean? So you'd have to have several on the go. But where do you draw the line with this? Because if he painted them from life, how? Because you're an oil student.
But I think he made detailed descriptions of
Yes,
the time.
absolutely.
So,
Hello.
so when he did a sketch, he actually put the time.
Could have done with your Italian knowledge, because I'm rubbish. Well, it's more than me, Jackie. I don't understand at all.
Doing well.
Mary, what are those on that building in the middle? Are they all chimneys on the top of that building?
Yeah, they are.
Oh, wow.
You can tell the Venetian chimneys have a flourished pot. Yeah, they are like urns. They are.
I'm trying to work out what that was. There's so many of them on that.
I'll see. Let me see if I can. That's 61%.
So you can see what it's like.
Oh, yeah, you can see, yes. Wow, yeah.
It's a lot of chimneys.
Done anymore since COVID.
Do you know why they were that?
No, I think it was just a Venetian style.
Oh, it's just to make the sparks come out as far away from the building as possible.
Yeah.
They're still like that. They've still got them, even though they're not all used.
I mean, it's not a very crisp image, this, but
Oh, that makes sense.
Yes, it is. It was for the sparks. Yeah.
keeps them out and away
Yeah.
because of it being very enclosed.
Yeah.
That's why they're so tall as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Chance,
To go.
Because you wouldn't want smoke blowing black in because
A lot of wood.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
a lot of wood, but also carbon, smoke, and water creates lye.
Right, yeah.
So Venice would be a soap box, wouldn't it? All the canals would be soapy if your ashy smoke ash got wet and kept coming down into the canal. You'd get lye after the gondolas coming through, wouldn't you? So,
Quite attractive.
I love chimneys because you get so many different shapes.
well, how I know that is because somebody, some weird conspiracy theorist online was saying they'd not long had a storm, and they were like, why, what's happening? What's gone wrong with the weather? Because they've had forest fires, and then it's rained, and then all the streets are soapy. But that's how they made lye, isn't it? It's ash and water. So basically, you've just got soap, and that must have happened in a few places. If you've got your ash landing in the water and the constant movement of the gondolas, you'd get soap, you'd get lye. So that's interesting.
And if you had a fire, as they obviously did have
Yeah.
fires as well.
Exactly.
Like a mess, wouldn't it?
So here,
Oh.
first Westminster Bridge. Very busy. I don't actually like this one, if I'm honest. But I'm not a massive fan of bridges, not really long bridges.
Is it because it's straight across?
Yeah, I think so. For me, it splits the.
Yes, it is. It's kind of cuts it in half, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's how it looked, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's a much easier view than if you do it at an angle where it was like starting closer, getting further away from you. It would be really tricky. But yeah.
It's not very romantic.
What's
like
that?
Venice, is it?
Where's
No,
he,
no, it's a bit
where's he
boring.
been standing?
I don't know where the first Westminster Bridge was.
Probably on
Is
another
it still
bridge.
there?
Maybe
It
there's
was
no
the only
bridge.
one bridge. It was the only bridge at that time.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
that bridge isn't there anymore.
No. So he must be on a bend in the river, maybe. Where was the first Westminster Bridge? Let's.
It's got to be
Well,
near.
Westminster.
Well, yeah.
Perhaps he's up the London Eye.
Isn't it there at all now?
I don't think it's there now.
No,
Not
that's
that one.
not that
There
one.
will be one.
Yeah, there is a Westminster Bridge, but it's not
But
that
I'm
one.
just thinking, where's he parked his
Yeah,
car?
exactly.
Yes.
Let's see if we
He
can have a
seems
look.
to be high up as well, doesn't
Yeah.
he? He's not on a level, is he? So
No.
it's like he's up a mast or something in the crow's nest of a ship.
Because he's looking.
It was between Westminster and Lambeth, so it's pretty much it was 44 foot
Oh,
long.
perhaps it had a fire, did it? Or something. It didn't collapse.
Let me have a look.
Well, which was the one that the Americans
That
bought
was
when
London
they
Bridge,
bought
wasn't it?
London Bridge.
Because they thought they were getting
Tower
Tower
Bridge,
Bridge, but
yeah.
they got
London.
London Bridge.
Which is
Oh,
a
so
really
it wasn't.
boring bridge.
Yeah, it wasn't that one then.
So it was widened in 1760 to 1763. With Putney Bridge, the bridge paved the way for 4 bridges within 3 decades: Blackfriars Bridge, Kew Bridge, Battersea Bridge, and Richmond Bridge. By the mid-19th century, the bridge was subsiding badly and expensive to maintain. The current bridge was designed by Thomas Page and opened in 1862. So it was subsiding, I suppose, through
Yeah, it's in the same place.
use. It's in exactly the same place. So where would he have
So it collapsed in the end.
been
Well,
sat?
well, if it's Westminster Bridge, I mean, I'm only assuming. So one side is the South Bank now, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the London Eye and everything, and the other side is Houses of
Westminster.
Parliament.
Yeah.
So there's no narrowing
No.
of the river
No.
or bends that he could be in. He must
So-
be on a boat.
Maybe he was in a crow's nest on a boat,
That's what I thought, crow's nest on a boat.
but a boat that couldn't have gone under that bridge.
Yes.
Just bobbing along.
Unless
He
he's.
might have been in a building and looking through a telescope.
Or
Oh, that's
what's those things
possible.
that go around corners? Like a
Periscope.
Periscope.
Because I'm trying to work out, is that Lambeth Palace on the right?
It is Lambeth, it goes from Westminster.
No, I'm trying to work out which orientation it is. So the 2 buildings, or the 2 towers there, is that still here, do you think?
Is that Westminster Abbey?
It looks like Westminster Abbey.
but
Yeah,
it's not all
it does
all
look
that
a bit
Don't
like
know where that
Westminster.
And then
Right.
that's the Tower of London in the background, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that is.
Oh yeah.
I think.
But you see, I can't work out where he sat to draw it unless
No,
he
I mean,
saw
if that's Westminster Abbey, I've had to turn my map upside down because he's facing the other direction.
Yeah.
That is Westminster Abbey. Isn't
That
it?
is Westminster Abbey. Yeah. So there's Westminster
No,
Bridge.
it's not. It must be something
It's
else,
not the
isn't
Tower
it?
of London.
No.
No.
It's,
Is that
different, it's not the Tower Bridge. It's the Westminster.
Right. The river does bend on by Waterloo. So he's possibly on the bend.
What, it's still be in a boat though.
He'd have to be in the boat.
View.
Like Queen's Walk it is now. Belvedere Road. South Bank. It bends just on South Bank.
Oh right, yeah. So that's Westminster Bridge now.
Yeah.
That's really near to the Houses of Parliament then.
Yeah.
So that means the Houses of Parliament
Are behind or off. They're here.
It's just
Yeah.
a different angle.
Like,
just a different angle.
Big Ben and everything is here.
Yeah.
Oh right, yeah, yeah. So what is that building in the background then?
That's Westminster Abbey.
That is Westminster
Two
Abbey.
towers in Westminster.
Yeah, no, that one in the back, right at the back with the sort of like
I'm not sure.
dome in
Four
it.
spikes.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Hang on. That is something.
It looks to me like the Tower of London.
It does, but it's in the wrong direction, isn't it?
But we know he cut and pasted.
Ah, well, yeah, maybe you put it on there.
Well, there's every possibility that he moved it because why wouldn't you?
yeah.
Because I'm just thinking that it would have been hard for him to get that view looking down onto those boats. So how much of that was drawn from, if you like, put together rather than
Perhaps as a
observed?
building.
What, like a
It's sort of
montage?
like-
I'm just trying to see. So Westminster Abbey, because that building is much further back, isn't it? It's almost like where Pimlico is and Millbank, compared to Westminster.
He's in the building looking down.
Yeah.
Really. Because it's quite a height. He's looking down.
Yeah,
He's looking
exactly.
down on the top of that barge and the boats. So I'm wondering if he's done it from.
I think that's a royal barge, isn't it?
The one
Looks
in the
like it.
middle, yeah.
Yeah. So he's got to. I mean, there could be little piers and jetties, but he's too high up.
Yeah.
He's not on ground level for this, so he's got to be up a mast. So he couldn't have used.
Well, we'll never know.
No, and he couldn't have used a camera obscura up the middle of a mast in a crow's nest, could you?
Maybe strapped to the mark
Like Turner.
Like
Yeah.
that, yes.
So it's interesting, isn't it? But the view hasn't really changed that much. But it's interesting how he's in the middle of the river. Because you wouldn't be now, would you? You'd have to. The only way we could be on that is if we were on Lambeth Bridge, looking down,
Yeah.
and that wasn't built. So weird. Right, let's have a look at another London scene. Westminster Abbey with a procession of Knights of Bath.
That's like a photograph.
Isn't it? But what is it that makes it look like a photograph?
The light.
The light. It is the light and the strong shadows. I mean, you can see the lights coming from the right in this picture, can't you? And it's so three-dimensional. But it's all the figures. What would that look like if there were no people in to give it scale? Or, I mean, without a procession, just people gives it a massive sense of scale, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you need that. How tall is Westminster Abbey? If you've never been, you wouldn't know.
But again, that's from high up.
Yes.
Looking down.
Yes. Well, you know why, don't you? You know why he's done that.
No.
Because if you were on ground level painting Westminster Abbey, it would converge.
Yes.
You'd have converging lines because the buildings are so tall. You'd have 3 planes of perspective.
Yeah.
You've already got 2 lines of perspective. You've got 2-point perspective because you've got buildings on angles. So you've got that, but you'd also have a 3rd point of perspective going up. So it makes it much easier.
But
And
remember,
photographers had the same thing with
he's
old
a set
cameras.
designer, isn't he?
Yes,
So he doesn't have to be in the place
at that time.
he's drawing
No.
at that time. He'll just go back. He will have done a few sketches and whatever,
Yeah.
and then he thinks, oh, it would look better if I did this, da, 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 and he
Yes.
knows about angles
Yeah.
and all of that, doesn't
Yeah,
he?
exactly.
So he probably was never there.
No,
at that
and it's
angle.
much easier to paint that building face on rather than from ground level up. I would prefer to paint it this way than if I was standing down looking up, because any building looking up. But my uncle was a photographer, and when I was there over the weekend, he was showing me some of his old cameras, and he said apparently you didn't want converging lines on buildings if you were photographing buildings, so they all had spirit levels on the top of the cameras, so you could level it so your building was square on, because converging lines cause if you were cataloguing photographs, which he did a lot of, you don't want converging lines apparently.
Looks as though it's toppling over.
Well, yeah, and it would all depend as well. If you've got a page full of buildings and they're all converging, but you're slightly leaning one way, you know what I mean? If you're just taking, if you're not perfectly level, or if there's, and you've got lots of different, it looks wrong. Whereas you could have loads of buildings like this on one page and it would look right,
Yeah.
because they're all face on. It's a bit like when with Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel with his figures, he would alter the perspective of the figures to make it look right from ground level,
Yeah.
which is why Michelangelo's David's head is big, because it was supposed to be on a plinth. So when you're looking up at a giant figure, it narrows at the top.
Yeah.
So if you make the head bigger and the shoulders bigger, it actually opens out the proportions, so he looks like a figure as you would look at him face on. I mean, the skill that these artists had, we still call them the masters, because to be honest, we've not surpassed them. We've not surpassed. I mean, there are still artists that work in this sort of style.
But when you look at, I've just seen David Hockney exhibition of his digital
Yes.
rubbish, excuse me saying that, but it is rubbish. And you look at that, it's no comparison. I mean, David Hockney does a few blinking scribbles on his digital iPad and puts it up and sells it for an absolute fortune. Canaletto, you know, he had to spend over a year slaving away painting a beautiful painting like this. It's just, there's no comparison.
There isn't, and I think it's also a bit of the change in society, because people aren't willing to wait for a year for a painting.
They've got
You
no
know,
respect.
I'll get a commission and it'll be like, oh, I need it in 2 weeks, please.
Yeah.
Can you do an oil painting portrait of me great granny or whatever? I'll come back on Wednesday. You know, it's that kind of thing. Same as just picture frames. When I was like 17, and the shop I grew up working at, we had a picture framing area, and people would wait 3 to 4 weeks for picture frames. Now they want it tomorrow, or even walk away. But if I come back later, can I have it? You know, yeah. It's amazing how society has changed this speed for one. No one's willing to wait for anything anymore. It's
I don't know how they
interesting.
get on with trying to book builders and things.
No.
Because you have to blooming wait for
Well,
them.
do you know what? I think that's why you do see on social media, I need a builder come tomorrow. Can you recommend anyone? And then they'll literally just ring everyone that's been recommended to say find out who needs the money more. It's interesting. Right. Last actual painting, Eton College. And this is the view from the bank of the Thames, looking across the sprawling meadow towards Eton College on the horizon. Shady glade, softly lit landscape. It's quite dreamy. It's a bit Constable-ish, isn't it, in a way, in terms of the colours?
Doesn't look like a Canaletto at all.
But then it's English scenery.
Yeah. And trying to paint English scenery in Italian style works for some buildings, because some of the buildings in London were built in Italian style. You know what I mean? It's got that same sort of thing, but really hard in just day-to-day work. It does. I would have said this was Constable rather than Canaletto. And you've got a group of picnickers and that tree leads us in because the tree's leaning. It leads us towards Eton College and the landscape in the background. Now, there's a lot of inaccuracies in the depiction of the chapel, the college buildings, and surrounding houses, which suggests possibly that he was relying on sketches made on the spot and didn't really know the area that well. Whereas today you'd use Google Maps, because I've had to do that. I was given a commission, was it last year, of a cottage on a river that was a painting, and I had to do a new painting of it from that painting, and they said the building still exists. So I was able to go on Google Maps, go to that bridge, and see the building. I mean, there was lots of overgrown trees because it was, nearly 100 years later. But I was able to see what was around it and how the river bent. And you know what I mean? There's a few little things like that that I was able to, without having to go there. So if I was having to make a sketch, I could use that as a reliance. But we've also got Google now. But if you're Canaletto and you've made a sketch of Eton College, that'll make a great painting. But then you don't live round there. You don't know the area. You've kind of got to rely exactly on your sketch. And if that's inaccurate, the painting is going to be inaccurate.
So I wonder what sort of inaccuracies there are then.
I'm sure they're not. They'll be from picky people, because I don't know if that view exists in the same way.
There's a lot more buildings.
Oh, I don't know. I doubt it'll be a sprawling.
Well, do you know, you're talking Eden College. So
What?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so when you think of the year, you wouldn't have had a lot around it.
no.
You wouldn't have thought that there would really be inaccuracies.
Oh, it
He
still
might
looks
have
the same
included-
actually.
He might not have included things by design,
Yeah.
I bet it is
but
surrounded
you
by
couldn't
quite a
do
lot
an
of
inaccurate
countryside.
thing. You couldn't do it.
The only one I can find is River Thames, an Alamy thing, looking at it from further down the river.
Oh,
So there's the college there.
Yeah.
So we're a little bit further down,
Yeah.
but it's still very much the same.
It is, yeah.
Oh
That
yes,
tree.
oh yes, isn't that lovely? Yes.
So it's amazing how similar the view is. So we're slightly further down the left of the
Oh,
river
yeah.
compared to what it is, but it's still got a lot of openness.
Yeah, well, like you said, money.
Taller trees. But that's what's really interesting, and it works with all forms of painting when you're doing scenes of buildings. Like I say to you, as long as you keep what makes that landscape recognisable the same, you can tweak things, because actually the main difference here is that you've got bushes have grown taller, the trees are bigger, but the building's the same. So as long as the identifiable elements of a landscape, be it the shape of a hill or be it the buildings, remain the same, then you can grow trees, cut trees, change it, because throughout the centuries, trees grow, trees die, things change. Right, so here we have a portico with a lantern, and this is one of those half made up scenes. An etching. It's beautiful though, isn't it?
This is how the sea belong with those ships that get.
It looks almost decayed, doesn't it? It's like a fantasy ruin.
It's like one of those romantic ruin kind
Yeah.
of things.
There's a name for that, isn't there? Is that what you
Gothic.
were talking about earlier? Because, again, we saw a lot of these in that exhibition.
Capriccio.
Yeah, well, they look like something out of a medieval fairy tale.
Mm.
They've got a bit of ruins and everything in them, but they're not.
They're not.
real.
No.
They just made them up.
It's like Victorian.
Yes. Like
Well,
novels and things. Yeah, Gothic. Yeah, a bit odd.
What's his name did a lot of those, didn't he?
What's his name?
That we did last month. Fried bread.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Friedrich thingy. Yes.
Fried bread.
We should probably do an art history on what's his name.
And what's his name? We should, because I mentioned what's his name a lot. So maybe I should do an art history on what's his name.
Prolific in his time. Oh, what's his name?
Very, yeah.
He got about.
Yes.
And there we have another Capriccio.
Capriccio.
So some of it's real, some of it's not, but it's just a nice way of practicing architectural drawing. So this looks to me like it's done in pen and wash on paper.
I like these better.
I like them. They feel more timeless to me.
Well, don't you?
I like this more than an etching,
Do you?
and I like this probably more than a. I don't know. I think the sort of the way you have to leave out stuff, and when you look at a Canaletto painting, and this is no slight on Canaletto at all, but everything's there. Everything's there.
So there's no suggestion.
No, you've got. I mean, even that woman dropping with the spindle, you know exactly what she's doing. There's nothing. There's nowhere for you to go. And it's. I feel the same about photorealist or hyperreal paintings. Once you've gone, oh my goodness, that looks like a photograph.
Like acrylics, a lot of acrylics.
It may as well be a photograph. Whereas something like this, I could look at for a lot longer because there's more suggestion and there's more. Oh, maybe what is,
I'd walk past
what's
them.
round the corner, what's there.
No.
Whereas with Canaletto's paintings, you know exactly what's there. You know.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I prefer these,
Yeah.
and you don't.
It is.
It's very personal, isn't it, art?
It is.
It 100% is. Yeah, because we've often said that there's things that religious paintings sometimes in galleries I walk straight
I
past.
walk
Yeah.
straight past
Because I
those.
think, and then other people absolutely love them.
But I have to say, with something like this, I prefer it aged. I wouldn't like it brand new on white paper. Do you know what I mean? I think it's the mottled yellow
Yes,
paper
yeah.
that makes it feel more romantic and exciting. Where if it was on brand new paper,
So what about the one before? Because that seems to be.
I do like an etching. And to be honest, there's far more skill in an etching than a painting because everything's got to be backwards, and you've got to the bit that's going to be black, you've got to etch out.
Very clever.
No, the brick that's not black you have to etch out. So you're having to work in reverse and back to front, ready for when it,
Undoubtedly clever.
you know.
I have enough trouble working the right way round.
I know. I mean, it's the same with, when you think of Hogarth's Gin Street and Beer Lane and all of those etchings, they were having to be done.
Well, now they're very clever, but even so, I'd still rather have a painting.
And I don't know, there's a sort of magical quality about black and white.
They look like
Book illustrations.
Yeah. Is it Arthur Rackham or somebody?
Rackham.
Rackham who did
Yeah.
lots of these sorts of.
The fairy tale.
Yes. Alice
I
in
mean,
Wonderland.
these kind of things made them affordable and portable, which is exactly what happened with Hogarth over here. You start doing prints, it makes art affordable for the normal folk, and they can appreciate it. Why should art only be for the wealthy? So that's the thing with these, but you're not going to get a huge amount of profit on them like you do with a painting. So there's different things. So I'm gonna sort out any drinks now. I ought to do him again because I did him a long time ago. Did you do Hogarth with me?
I could bring you a portfolio of
It's-
his prints.
Oh wow.
Perhaps I'll bring it one next. I'll bring it.
Yeah, I mean I haven't done Hogarth for a long time, so I can't remember what it was. I think it was when I did courses, wasn't it? I did 5-week courses, so it might be something to do with that, maybe.
I've got a folder with all the printed.
Sue, did you want another drink?
Can I have black coffee, please, Barry? Thank you.
D?
Have a tea, please.
Jane, did you want another drink? You all right, Liz?
Black coffee, please.
And you're okay.
Lemon barley.
Back shortly.
Yes, I'll have to bring
Lemon
it.
barley.
I'll have a little look at Lowry now.
They really are.
I went to college in Weymouth, so we used to do
A little bit of Lowry.
performance like that.
We went to the shopping centre, we went to have a coffee and wildlife.
It is.
But I love that.
So this is a self-portrait by Lowry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Lowry now.
Oh, here he is.
Yeah.
Here he is.
There he is, in his flat cap.
That's a very good portrait, isn't it?
It's beautiful. He technically was a really good artist.
Oh, yes, he's brilliant.
I watched the film Mrs. Lowry,
Yes, I've seen that as well.
and it's Timothy Spall
Yeah.
again who played Turner, but he plays Lowry this time, and it's about his relationship with him and his mom. Very interesting, actually, and
Very good actor.
and it really makes you understand a lot.
But he really could draw. He was a brilliant drawer.
Oh, as a draftsman, he was amazing. He was brilliant, but it was just a style
Well, it was in that film when his mum didn't like his painting until some other
a wealthier lady. Yes,
liked it.
and it was I can see it's just like Liz.
It was only the ship.
What was it I
Painting
did
of
that
the
on?
ship.
Yeah.
What was it?
It was it was a building, a painting of a building. Oh, it's there. I like that now. You said.
Yeah. Wasn't it because some was it an Art Deco or something?
Yes, yes. Oh, I don't. Oh, it was the
Oh, it's
the statue of
Jesus.
Christ the Redeemer
Ah.
in Brazil. Oh, it's Art Deco. Oh, I like it now.
Yeah.
Didn't like it until it was Art Deco. Hate it. I don't like it. It's Art Deco. Oh, isn't it lovely? just like Lowry's mum. So, born in 1887 in Stretford, which was then in Lancashire. His mother wanted a girl, so right from the start, it wasn't great,
Right from the start.
and she found it uncomfortable to even look at him at first because she wanted a girl.
Did you say he was an only child?
And later she expressed envy of her sister Mary, who had 3 splendid daughters instead of a clumsy boy. So interesting, really. You know, his father was of Northern Irish descent, and he worked as a clerk in a Sun Property Company, and was withdrawn and introverted, but probably that's more to do with who he married rather than his personality. Lowry once described him as a cold fish and the sort of man who realised he had a life to live and did his best to get through it.
Oh, lovely attitude, yeah.
Yeah,
Poor
so
Larry, imagine being brought up in that kind of
yeah, well, you've got a mother who claims she actually never wanted you and wanted a girl, and a father that's got no emotion and is very not present.
Plods through the day.
Yeah.
I mean, as a child, gosh, I mean,
It's gonna make an impact on your life.
There's no warmth, is there?
No warmth, no love. So really, no matter what he would have done, his mother would never have been
Mm-mm.
happy, proud, pleased.
Even if he'd have changed sex, she probably wouldn't have
No,
No.
no.
liked that at all.
And actually, you know, after Lowry's birth, his mother's health was too poor for her to continue to teach. She was a religious woman, talented, respected, aspirations of becoming a concert pianist. And she was also irritable, nervous, brought up to expect high standards by a stern father, controlling, intolerant of failure. And her illness was used as a means of securing the attention and obedience of her husband, and dominated her son in the same way as her own father.
Comes
So
over well in that film, doesn't it?
It does.
So-
He's very good at
yeah,
doing that.
so she just wouldn't tolerate anything. And you know, with some things, it may not even have been true. She may have had an idea once, oh, I'd like to be a concert pianist, but never really followed through with many lessons. But then with her health, oh, I can never be a concert pianist now. Do you know what I mean? I know people like that.
I've met a lot of them when I was practicing.
I could have been a this, I could have been a that, but because of you,
Well, yeah, I had to
since
give up-
I
had
gave
give
birth
up
to
my
you,
career for
yeah.
children.
absolutely, and that really does come across in the film. The way, I can't remember who portrayed her.
But the thing is, why did he remain at home? Why didn't he?
I
go
know.
out?
I think
Because it's
guilt.
part of it's part of the power.
It's like
Yeah.
the Svengali thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, my mother-in-law did that to my
Yeah.
when she became very ill later in life, and she told me she was never going to be independent again because she had Martin.
Yeah. It's a kind of a weird relationship, isn't it? Because she hates him, but needs him to be dependent, needs to want him to depend on her existence, but then hates him to be there. He can't move because he feels he needs to look after her because it's his fault that she's in this situation.
I can't
So
remember
it's
who the mother is.
no, it is. It's all fear and guilt, fear and guilt.
Vanessa Redgrave, was
Oh,
that
it
right?
could have been, yes, yes,
Rings a bell.
yes.
I had patients who had no intention of getting better.
No.
No intention.
Well, she was only in the film. She was only bedbound when she wanted to be,
Yes.
and it's sort of
It's a good excuse though, isn't it?
Yeah,
for
it
some
is.
people, for all the failures of your life, it's a
Oh,
good
yeah.
I couldn't do it because I was so ill.
yes.
You know, and so therefore you don't have to try.
I think nowadays she'd be bipolar.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
she's sort of like that, and you know you see it in films mainly or whatever with these controlling, usually mother matriarchal figures, and then if things don't quite go as they are, they'll have a touch of the vapors. I just my heart, you know, all of that kind of thing, just to control the situation and make everybody. That was very knowing, non.
It was very knowing.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting.
When they're just about to leave, if they've got
When you
found
get to
something they love and
95,
they're just
you get a bit like
about to
that.
leave, and then mother has
yes.
Yeah.
to stop them going.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
that kind of
Oh,
thing.
could you just stay a little bit longer?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yes.
would you mind? Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. Oh, you are good. Yes. So, and Lowry actually said that he did have an unhappy childhood, which is not really shocking. A very repressive family atmosphere. His mum appreciated none of his gifts as an artist. A number of books Lowry received as Christmas presents from his parents are inscribed to our dearest Lowry. And at school he made hardly any friends, showed no academic aptitude. His father was affectionate towards him, but was so quiet he was most comfortable just fading in the background. His father was just better off. He'd be the sort of dad that'd be in his shed all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, nice
My
enough when
to
you're
be
on-
honest, my dad was a bit like that. He was more of a background dad. He'd drive me places and he'd do things, but never with me. He'd talk to me about bricklaying, but when you're 7, you don't really care about bricklaying or mechanics.
When you're together, but doesn't actively feature in
No,
very much,
at family get-togethers, like we always used to go to my aunt's for New Year's Eve. He never danced. Goodness me, he wouldn't dance. But when I hear friends talk about him when he was younger, he was the life and soul of the party. So something happened when he stopped drinking, because he was a ravaged alcoholic until he met my mum, and he gave up overnight, never touched a drop, wouldn't even have a drink to celebrate. He would never have a glass of champagne or even a sip. It was always lemonade, and I think he knew he would be off that wagon within seconds. Couldn't give up smoking, but my mum said, if you're moving in here, you can't drink, and he overnight stopped. But he couldn't give up. So I think that was largely his personality, was the alcohol. And like at family gatherings, he was always the DJ. He'd just press play on the hi-fi unit. He wouldn't dance. He wouldn't dress up. He wasn't gregarious in that sort of sense. He was happy washing up in the kitchen, or he was happy, being part of it, but in the background.
Sometimes that's how people get into the alcohol, though, isn't it? Because it helps them.
Get out of
Get out of
themselves.
themselves,
Whereas my
yeah.
mum never needed anything.
Confident.
She was out there
Anyway.
Yes.
To do with confidence.
I think so. Well, I think a lot of my I need to chat to my aunt more, because I think a lot of my personality is very much like my dad's personality. I'm a mixture of, I've got the outwardness of my mom and the internal workings of my dad, because he had no teeth at 56. And I think he must have ground them all down, because I think I'm heading in the same way, because I've lost that many teeth from grinding them because of stress. And my aunt used to say he was a worrier. He was a worrier, but he would never vent it. So I'm wondering if he had a lot of similar
Anxiety.
issues
That'd be interesting
as
to
I
talk
would.
to your aunt
Yeah,
while we've got time.
yeah,
Yeah, don't leave it too late.
no,
Because it actually, Roger's very similar. He never really spoke to his family very much, and his dad died when Roger was quite young. And he was talking to an aunt a few years ago, and she said to him, "You're very like your dad." And do you know what that he just was made up? You know, because nobody had ever said that to him. 'Cause
No.
He didn't really know his dad, and for somebody who knew him to say you were really like your dad, so you'd probably find something out like that. Which
yeah.
you
Well,
probably
it's
not.
really funny because the more family gatherings I go to, there's the neighbours of my dad and his siblings are a bit younger than him, and the son keeps calling me Jack whenever he meets me because that was my dad's nickname. He'd say, "Hello, Jack, how are you doing?" He said, "I know you're not Jack really, but you remind me of him." And he was like, "Oh, you should have seen what he used to get me doing." You know, he took me to see my first film. You know, we went out. He taught me how to bet on the horses. Never knew my dad bet on the horses. But you know what I mean. And he keeps saying that, so that's quite nice because now I know who I am.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to know that kind of thing. So yeah, it's
quite a different
interesting.
person, isn't it? Though? It's like having two personalities.
Yeah. I mean, the dad I'm described by him when he was in his 20s, teens and 20s, is not the dad I would have ever said existed in my teens. You know, but then he was very poorly from when I was sort of 15, and then died when I was 19. So I really don't know the real him because, you know, as a teenager you're embarrassed of your parents anyway and you want as little to do with them as possible. So maybe if he'd have been exciting and gregarious I wouldn't have liked that either. You know, I was just mortified to have parents. I was. I mean, my mum was embarrassing enough for everybody, and if she knew she was embarrassing, she'd be more embarrassing because she'd find it hilarious. And I do exactly the same thing. I haven't got kids, but if I can embarrass somebody, then like my relatives, my nephews and nieces, then I will. And sometimes I try to do it to Jackie's children, but they're just used to me, and they don't find it as embarrassing. Whereas if Jackie did what I do, they'd disown you, wouldn't they? Yeah, just existing's bad enough. They're of that age. So he had leafy Manchester suburbs of Victoria Park where he grew up. When he was 22, due to financial pressures, the family moved to Station Road in Pendlebury.
What a lovely address.
Well,
Station Road.
landscape comprised of textile mills and factory chimneys rather than the leafy suburbs.
I'm obsessed with factories now.
And Lowry said, "At first I detested it, and then after years I got pretty interested in it, then obsessed by it. One day I missed a train from Pendlebury I'd ignored for several years, and as I left the station I saw the Acme Spinning Company's mill," and he talks about the framework of the rows of yellow lit windows against the sad damp skies, and you know, and that kind of really made him feel so much better. After leaving school he began to work for the Pall Mall Company collecting rents, and he'd spend some time in his lunch hour and in the evenings learning art. He took art lessons in antique and freehand drawing, and then he secured a place at the Manchester School of Art, and he studied under the French Impressionist Pierre Adolphe Valette.
Pencil and black chalk.
Yeah, to get the real darkness. Well, it would have been charcoal, I suppose. Or it would have been black pastel. Black pastel.
Coloured chalk.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
I've never
can get-
seen black.
No, I think it would be black pastel, but they weren't called pastels back then. In the same way, everything was just chalk. Oils were called oil sticks.
How old was he when this was when was
1924. He was born in 1887,
Okay.
so he was not a kid.
Not a kid, no.
So Lowry was full of praise for his art teacher, and he said, "I cannot overestimate the effect on me of the coming into this drab city of Adolphe. Is it Adolphe or Adolphe? Valette. Adlo. Adolphe Valette. Full of French impressionists, aware of everything that was going on in Paris, because it would have been round about 1905. The Impressionist movement started 1874, so it was still quite big. Monet was a big name still when Lowry was training in Impressionism. In 1915, he moved on to the Royal Technical Institute in Salford, and he studied until 1925, and then he developed an interest in industrial landscapes to begin his own style. So this is a nice little drawing. Lowry's oil paintings were originally impressionistic and dark in tone, but D.B. Taylor of the Manchester Guardian took an interest in his work and encouraged him to move away from a sombre palette. And Lowry started to use white as a background to lighten his pictures, which is exactly what the pre-Raphaelites used to do and the Impressionists, because don't forget, over here, the main way of painting would be to wash everything in raw sienna, whether it was oils or watercolours, and that took all the whites away, and you'd only put the white on at the end when you needed it, whereas pre-Raphs Impressionists worked on white, and it makes the colours pop.
Because the colours don't pop in this country, do they?
No. And that's why pre-Raphs looks like the lights are on.
It's like Technicolor, isn't it?
Yeah, when you compare it to the contemporaries, it was just... And that's why it was hated, because the contemporary artists felt like their work wasn't getting enough light.
That
But
one on that Holman Hunt did with the sheep in it, that, it's so bright.
oh, it is. It really is bright. I mean, if you imagine that against a load of other Victorian contemporary landscape paint, like a Landseer or whatever, just really dull.
Yeah.
Really dull. And often it was... I mean, they even would use raw sienna washes on watercolour paper, and then they'd use white gouache for highlights in clouds and white spots. So everything was muted, everything was dulled down. And there's still a lot of oil painters that will put a raw sienna wash on their canvas because they don't want the white. Don't want the white, whereas I like the white.
Yeah.
So it does make a big difference, really.
Didn't they say that some of these drawings that he did on the streets now are the only records that are now remaining?
Of the streets, absolutely, because, you're talking...
Yeah.
After the war, a lot of the streets are either bombed or have been knocked down to make way for other things. So yeah, there's it's a different.
That's why this place that we've just been to visit when we were in Bradford, called Saltaire, which is it's still all there, the actual streets with the houses and everything, like it was in Lowry's time. And it's quite fascinating because it's so unusual.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
I bet that's used for a lot of filming, is it?
I
Liz?
used to think it might be soon.
Mm.
Actually,
Did you
yeah.
go to the photography museum?
No.
Bradford? Oh, it's the national.
The media thing was closed. It's being refurbished. Yeah, science and
Cinema.
media thing. Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, he also painted mysterious and unpopulated landscapes with brooding portraits and these sort of things, which were only found after his death. So there's a lot of paintings that he did that we never saw. So his father died in 1932 with huge amount of debts, and his mother was subject to neurosis and depression, became bedridden and fully dependent on Lowry for her care. He painted after his mother fell asleep between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. because he'd got his own work and he was also having to try and pay off his father's debts. Many of the paintings he produced during that... Oh, someone in the shop checking. Were sort of self-portraits, often referred to as the Horrible Heads series. It's really sad, really. He expressed regret that he had very little recognition as an artist until his mother died in 1939. So he had to look after his mother for 7 years. And he was sad that she was not able to enjoy his success.
Yeah, that's a shame, isn't it?
However, I don't think she would have
Well, no.
enjoyed his success. I honestly don't think.
With
He would. I think he would have to have been a massive name, a celebrity, for her to be proud of him, which is quite sad.
But she
I-
could never have been because he was looking after her.
Exactly.
She would have put him down. if he-
Yeah, she did, yeah, absolutely, and I think that's the thing. But it's interesting that he was always wanting her approval, but he knew he'd never get it.
No, that's But isn't that film? It makes you think how really good that film is. You know?
Oh, it's
Because-
if you haven't, have you seen it? No.
Yes.
Mrs. Lowry.
I think I've got it on DVD somewhere.
it's
watch
so
it.
Good. Yeah, yeah.
It makes it so much more interesting, and now you've a bit about the background.
But you can see that relationship because you can see as an older man, it's like he's a little boy every time he enters
Yes,
that
exactly.
room, and and he's just waiting for his mum to say,
I've done a new
Mum."
painting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've done a new painting, and she's like, ooh,
Yes.
rubbish.
Yeah. I've done a painting for your birthday. I'll put it downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, just move it out of the way.
And he's always, he keeps on saying, oh, you know you can do it, Mother. Come on, you try. And she's like, I'm not doing it, or whatever.
Mm.
Yes,
And
yes.
you can see him wanting that
Yeah.
approval. It's awful. But actually, it's reflected in his art. Because his art is very kind of dulled down a bit, isn't it? And, you know, beautiful.
Yeah,
Very emotional. I think.
absolutely.
It's restrained, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So
But
this,
the trouble is, unfortunately, people can't seem to free themselves, can they?
no, it's very hard.
Ignoring it and carrying on in his naughty kind of- you know,
Very
to a
hard.
certain extent,
I
carrying on
think
his
for a
own way.
youngster as well, it's difficult.
Yes.
As you know, as a young person, and then that's it, isn't it?
That's your life.
Set. But as a young person, you can't escape from that.
And
It's
an
got to be
only
very
child.
strong. You've got
Yeah.
to
And then before
well,
you
you've
know
got
it,
to
you
be
can't
selfish,
No,
really.
exactly.
No, you can't get out.
No.
So this is actually the back now, the back end of Salford Museum and Art Gallery, the terrace above Peel Park, and in the background St Simon's Church and the factories along the River Irwell.
Sorry, which town, Barry?
Salford,
Salford. That is, where's that?
Manchester.
Manchester. I haven't been there. We'll put that on the list.
And this is another pencil and black chalk.
Oh,
Whoa.
what's that?
That's
Earthquake.
tattoo studio. The tattooing
Is
elephants
that
again.
somebody begging
Somebody
to stop?
Yes.
No, he has to pump his chair up to different angles and it just shakes the whole building.
Oh, gosh, dear. Fancy doing that.
Flat iron market.
Yeah, Flatiron Market. But there's a life to this.
It's
You've got-
movement in it, isn't
Yeah,
there?
you know, you've got the matchstick men figures.
That's
In
the
it.
kind of, like I like drawing like that with a pencil, buildings, but not with a ruler.
Yeah, because once you start using a ruler, if you only use a ruler for a bit of it, it looks worse.
It spoils it.
Yeah, because you either have to use a ruler for all of it or none of it.
It's
Yeah.
it's got more life when you don't use a
It
ruler.
has,
I
you're
think.
right, yeah, I think so.
Outbreak of Second World War, Lowry served as a volunteer fire watcher and became an official war artist in 1943.
Oh, did he? I didn't know that.
And in 1953, he was appointed official artist at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Is
after
that
it.
in the film?
No, because it finishes as she
It
dies.
does, doesn't it?
Well, that would have pleased his mother, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it?
And after his mother's death in October 1939, he became depressed and neglected the upkeep of his house so much that the landlord repossessed it in 1948. He was not short of money, and he bought the Elms in Mottram in Longdendale in what was Cheshire. The area was much more rural, and Lowry professed to dislike both the house and the area. And although he considered the house ugly and uncomfortable, it was spacious enough to set up a studio in the dining room to accommodate a collection of china and clocks he'd inherited from his mother. And he stayed there until he died 30 years later.
That's what you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clocks.
Yeah. He was very secretive and mischievous, who enjoyed stories irrespective of their truth. And that was found actually in that one episode of Fake or Fortune of Lowry, where he always, I'm a simple man with simple means, and I use I only use this colour, and this colour. So when they were investigating a Lowry painting, and they found out, he said he used zinc white, and titanium white, and the painting that it was examined, and they found it with zinc white. So they instantly said, "Oh, well, it can't be, because we know Lowry professed to never use zinc white." And then through the research of the programme, they found photographs. They found the painting on a mantelpiece in his office, a photograph of, but then they found a photo of him, and under his desk were like 15 boxes of zinc white. So it's sort of like he just made himself into a legend.
That's a myth, yeah, like a myth, isn't it?
Yeah. That he perpetuated. So I did then wonder how many Lowry paintings are real that have been deemed fake because it's the wrong white.
Yeah. Hopefully not destroyed like the
Well,
Notre
absolutely. His friends observed his anecdotes were more notable for humour than accuracy, and he did set out to deliberately deceive them. His stories about the fictional woman Anne were inconsistent, and he invented other people as frameworks on which to hang his tales.
Because he's lonely.
Yeah, and his collection of clocks were all set at different times. Mine are like that,
Yes, I know.
but that's just because I can't be bothered to sort them out. But for him, he said that it's because he didn't want to know the real time. And he claimed to others that it was from being deafened by their simultaneous chimes.
Well, that's true.
What a character he must have been.
Never married.
Eccentric.
Never married.
Never
Well, that's a
married.
surprise.
At the age of 88, he said that he'd never had a woman. Solitary, private person, but he was an ardent supporter of Manchester City Football Club and attended their matches all the time. On his 61st birthday, he retired from the Pall Mall Property Company in 1952.
Yes, he carried on a long time, didn't he, really?
Yes, he did. He really did. And then in 1957, a schoolgirl called Carol Ann Lowry, non-related, wrote to him at her mother's request asking to become an artist and for his help. So he invited her to his home, befriended the family, and his friendship with Carol Ann Lowry lasted for the rest of his life.
Just a friendship. Oh.
So yeah, interesting really.
School should do a follow-up film.
Yeah, of life after the Mrs. Lowry.
Interesting, wouldn't it? It sounds
They
like-
could just call it After Mrs. Lowry.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that would be really interesting because he died of pneumonia in Derbyshire, 88. I mean, he joked about retiring from the art world, citing his lack of interest in the changing landscape. And then he started focusing on figures and odd imaginary characters. He also produced a series of erotic work that nobody knew about until after he died.
Sounds weird.
A bit like Turner did exactly the same.
Oh, Ruskin.
And, well, yeah, this is the thing.
Rather sinister,
Yeah.
really.
Oh, I
Well, that's
didn't-
why, because Liz did the old ooh, ooh, ooh with the young girl.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know,
Well,
do
when
you?
you said that, I was thinking, oh.
Yeah, here we go.
Well, I mean, it would be classed as an inappropriate relationship with a 13-year-old girl, even if there was no relationship. It's just a bit dodgy for an old man, to befriend a prepubescent girl. But, I mean, it could have been innocent, but he was just very lonely. Absolutely, he was
It's a
just
shame, isn't it, that you have to have those thoughts when something like that happens.
because he
you know,
could have
it's
just really wanted to help.
If she was a nice, mature girl, and he was just a lonely old chap. I
Yeah,
mean,
and her mum was involved as well.
Yeah,
you know, it's
exactly.
not
They were
just-
just friends.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But men are not like that.
It doesn't. It doesn't
Not all
always.
Men are not like that, no.
What men are not like? Oh, some of them are.
It depends really, because I mean, we don't really know about his sexuality.
No,
Well, no, I was going to say
So
that, do
you
we?
know,
I mean, the fact that he said he never had a woman, did he say he'd never had a man?
and the fact is, this is you won't find this anywhere, but it's all supposition. Had he been gay with the mother that he had, that would have just been
I mean, it's
not
one of those-
allowed.
It is like my brother-in-law, who has never, ever had a girlfriend.
Yeah.
No.
And if you went anywhere at weekends, he went home to mum and dad. And then when dad died, he went definitely home every weekend. And then when mum had her stroke, she very successfully manipulated him into looking after her totally for the remaining years of her life. So
In the same way, you see.
exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly the same way.
He is odd.
Well, it's going to make you odd
so
though, isn't it?
Martin is odd. There's no two ways about it.
I mean,
And he wouldn't have done anything
No,
to hurt his mother.
no.
Absolutely
Oh, no.
wouldn't. Because she was his companion. I think she was the love of his life.
Oh, yes, yes.
And he's never had a girlfriend. He's never shown any interest
Well,
in
he-
either men or women.
Nobody came up to his mother's.
I suspect so.
Mm.
but
I
also with
suspect so.
Lowry, it might be because he didn't want to get in a relationship because he couldn't handle having somebody like that again.
Well, you're in a relationship with your mother, aren't you? Because
Yeah.
that's
Oh, yeah.
20.
Yeah, she
That's
was
24/7, isn't it?
Yeah.
I
You haven't really got
mean,
time for anybody
Well, if he
else,
can
have
only
you?
paint between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., how is he going to find time for? And you know,
relationship,
you know.
exactly.
But what would his mother have said?
exactly.
And he couldn't cope.
Nobody would ever have been good enough.
No, and he'd know that, so he wouldn't dare at all.
Or if she ended up favouring the woman, over him.
Because she always wanted a
Why don't you
daughter.
do this? Why don't you be more nice? Why aren't you out with her? Why are you not? You know what I mean? He'd just get it twice then, wouldn't he? Or he might end up finding someone
Just like his
domineering like his mum.
Yeah.
So it's awful. So these are the sort of Lowry paintings that we're.
These are the ones that you.
Oh, see,
He
I
might have done things on the slide.
Well, absolutely, but we'll never know about those if he was so secretive.
I've had a cushion with that painting he did of that man lying on a wall
Oh right, yes,
that he saw. He walked home one day and he
yeah.
saw a man just all in his pinstripe, and he was lying on the wall like this, and his briefcase case down on the pavement, and the umbrella. It's a brilliant picture.
Oh right.
I haven't got that
It's
one
so
on here.
good. In fact, you'd almost think the figure is like a ship. You could almost see a ship
Oh wow.
because his feet turned up, and I look almost like funnels.
Wow.
How lovely.
But I've given the cushion to someone else actually.
Oh, I
I
like
had it.
this
It
one.
was a present.
But you know, it's architectural.
Yeah.
It's got figures.
You've been
It may not be
this-
Venetian,
No, it's lovely.
but you've got the layers of the cityscape
That's
of
been
people
done
doing
before.
normal things.
It's been done with the
Well,
ruler.
I am
It's been
obsessed
done
with
with the ruler.
chimneys.
And then going to the match. Now this sold in towards the end of 2022 for £7.8 million.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy for that.
I love the way they're
It's
all
lovely.
leaning.
Yes.
Yeah, moving into the middle, aren't they?
They are. You've got that converging, and then you've got all of that industrial cityscape behind, terraced houses, chimneys, factories. It really sets the scene. So although this isn't meant for the tourist market, it is showing Manchester
Converging.
as it really was at that time. So just because it's not the same style, but don't forget, they said Canaletto opened the way for Impressionism with his use of colour and shadow, and then Lowry was trained as an Impressionist painter.
And he's unique, isn't he? That's the thing with Lowry. Nobody ever painted like him.
No, you can.
Since.
When you look at something like that, you know that that's Lowry,
You
don't
do,
you?
100%.
Yeah.
It's just,
Oh, I like that.
I do too.
The cricket
That's
match.
Lovely.
I love his work. Absolutely
That's
love it. It's
beautiful.
very. It could be
Into the-
described as naive in a way, couldn't it? But it's just lovely.
It's interesting how he's used the black there, like the black.
Yes,
for
the
fence
black
at the front.
the black follows through, doesn't it? You
Does
you
that mean
follow the
that's-
black through.
Does that mean that's part of his psyche though? The
It
blackness,
could
the
be, or
blackness in his
it
soul.
could just be to try and create the dullness that he sees in everything. Because I
Well,
mean, they
you
would
use
all be
black,
brown.
don't you?
I do
You
like black.
those for trees and things, and I always think, ooh, black, but actually it does.
It
give
brings
a good
forward. But you
emphasis.
see, for here, the black is a really good device because it follows through. Because you've got that stark back fence at the front, and then you've got a few bits of black clothes. Then you've got the little sheds and things at the back, and then you've got the windows and the telegraph pole or phone pole, whatever that is, aerial.
But you've got all
At the
those
back.
kids playing, and that wasn't his childhood at all, was
Well,
it?
he's not playing, is he? He's
No,
observing.
he's over here looking, so it's yeah.
And we're not part of the fathers that are chatting on the wall either, but those fathers are not interested in the kids' match.
Well, they never are.
So it shows you that distant relationship, perhaps.
But that black makes it look a bit dirty as well, doesn't it? A bit makes me think
Grim.
of coal
Yeah.
dust. And of course, that's what
You find a lot of
Right.
paintings of the Black Country
coal
during the
dust.
Industrial Revolution's got a lot of black in because it's just filthy. I never realised actually Downing Street, number 10 Downing Street, isn't black.
Isn't it?
It was dirt from pollution, and they cleaned it. They cleaned the building next to it that was black brick, and then Downing Street was so famous at that point that they've actually stained and painted the bricks black now.
Really?
But originally, it was just pollution at
Have you
Downing
seen
Street.
Big Ben? We went
No,
up to
they
Big
cleaned
Ben.
it.
Oh, it's clean. It doesn't look like Big Ben at all. It's absolutely pristine. It's glowing, but it doesn't look like Big Ben.
No,
It's 'cause
it
they've
looks
done
like a
they've
fake.
cleaned the face up and everything, and it's regilded. And Big Ben is like a lovely pale honey colour, and it looks so weird, but it's filthy.
Yeah,
Absolutely filthy.
I think this is the
It's
problem,
like
isn't
Our
it?
Lady Godiva here.
Oh
Yes.
yeah,
That's all-
absolutely,
that's
yeah.
all pollution.
What?
Why she's like that.
Has she been cleaned up yet? Then?
She hasn't, because they did the cross a couple of
years.
years ago, didn't they? They
Yes.
cleaned the
Yes.
cross a few years ago, and that went from black to white,
Yeah.
almost. Yeah,
Was it oily?
yeah,
She needs a good clean up, though, doesn't she? Anyway,
yeah. No, it's amazing, really. So yeah, Downing Street is brick
It's
coloured.
brick,
It's just
yeah.
well, it's not now, but originally it was.
Didn't know that.
Fancy them doing that.
House on the Moor.
Isn't it?
So that's a very interesting landscape, but it's got a naive look to it.
Yes, it
That doesn't
And
look
the
like a
rounded shapes, he's getting
That's-
rounded shapes
Yeah,
now.
that's sort of almost magical, isn't it? Kind of fairy tale-y.
Yes.
With those.
But unpopulated. Well,
Yeah.
I say unpopulated, it's not, because the smoke comes from the windows, so you know that there's someone
Somebody in
there.
a bit spooky, though.
Was it a friend's house that he happened to meet?
I'm not sure really, because it could be a made-up landscape totally. You know, one of these fantasy ones
No
that he did.
trees.
No trees, just very bleak,
Very bleak.
but green.
Where's that? I wonder then.
It
You
could-
because you don't have many landscapes in this country.
I don't think
Don't
it
have-
exists.
No, it's in his
And I
mind.
think he's made that up, yeah.
I think you're right. Looks like Hobbit land.
Yeah,
That's what-
I
that's what
think
thought,
it's
very
that sort
fairy
of
tale kind
when he
yeah.
went through that period of unpopulated landscapes. But you see, this one struck me because it
Oh, wow.
you got a monument on a hill, a landmark.
Is it?
But it made me feel a bit Brian Cookish,
Yes.
you know, with the layers of blocks of colour. Similar time period as the railway posters.
Is it? When was
1936 this is.
36, or the coming of war, and probably feeling a bit.
That's got a sort of foreboding look about it, hasn't it?
Uh-huh.
It has got.
And it has got a feel of the war
When
landscapes.
did Mother die? Not
But it
39.
39.
Well, he's getting.
But was his father died in, when
She
did
was
his...
probably at her worst in 36 then. So it's very depressive.
So when did he start doing his erotica?
Much later on, I think. Well, we don't know when he did his erotica because it was so secret.
Is that the contour?
Oh, like
yeah.
voluptuous.
Is that breast?
Jane! Yes! Big booby.
Like a big booby.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, but it looks like a woman lying on her side, doesn't
Yes.
it?
Yes.
I
could
think-
be
I
right.
think it's that.
I think you might be right. Have we got any of his erotica then?
No, I wasn't going to show you any erotica. I couldn't find any.
You can
To
do
do
that.
now
You
is
can do that
erotica.
on your own. Yes, you can do your own research.
It's interesting.
His father died in 1932 and his mother died in 1939. So this is the in-between. This would be probably when he'd be one of his lowest points.
Yes.
Definitely. And the war probably on the horizon.
Yes.
36. Certainly storm clouds gathering. But that's not like Lowry at all, is it?
No.
That's very experimental.
But this is, I like to show you these kind of things because, like on Fake or Fortune, they will always go, oh, well, that can't be real because it's not in his usual style.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
What
Like
oh,
you're
they'd
not
have a
allowed
field
to.
day with mine, wouldn't they? Goodness
Not allowed
me.
to experiment or do anything different.
No,
You just
not
have
allowed
to
at
do
all.
that.
Because, I mean, he left a massive cultural legacy. His work's sold for millions, really, and they've inspired other artists. You've got the Lowry Art Gallery in Salford Quays, was opened at 2000 at a cost of £106 million, named after him. 55 of his paintings, 278 drawings, and the world's largest collection of his work with up to 100 on display at any time at the Lowry exhibition. And then he had a statue of him unveiled in Mottram, 100 yards away from his home, where he lived from 1948 until 1976, when he died. So, you know, he did all right out of it, but it's a shame that he never really knew about a lot of it. And then this is a watercolour of just figures.
Oh, yeah, those figures are very. That little one at the front.
They're very Lowry-esque,
Yeah.
aren't they?
But is every type of human
Oh.
there,
Yeah.
Yes.
isn't it?
Oh yeah, very cross section of society.
You haven't got the one where he's painted all the cripples.
No, I haven't got that one, and I haven't put the one on of the funeral party.
Oh yes.
Alright.
And it's just a row of people, different ages, all in funereal clothes.
But he's done, because there were so many cripples in various forms, there was a painting in it and he decided to paint them.
Yeah.
There were a
That
lot of
later.
cripples because a lot of factory accidents.
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely. There were people on crutches and all sorts. Yeah, and post-war.
No health and safety.
Oh,
No.
no.
And the NHS had only just started, really. So
That little person at the front looks a bit like Alfred too.
They remind me of Postman Pat figures.
Yes. Yeah.
Or olive oil, you
almost
know,
like
and
cartoonish,
Popeye.
Yeah.
Yes, they are a little bit.
So this is a watercolour
Like
one.
early Mickey Mouse
Mm,
feet.
Yeah.
That little girl in the middle. They look like Mickey Mouse feet.
they do.
So it looks as though the paint was quite wet, really.
Yes, absolutely. It's very watercolor. This is a watercolor. He mainly worked in oils, but this is a watercolor. But then look at this one.
Oh wow.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Puddles on the beach.
I had got a video from the Lowry Museum, but the woman talking about the painting only for 50 seconds. She's not mic'd up, and you can't hear a thing. No, I had the headphone. I had it on. I mean that's the video talking about this painting, but she's not talking about it much. She's just talking about how people responded to the painting, and they spend a long time looking at this. But she's so mumbly, and that's off the Lowry website, the Lowry Museum website, and you'd think they'd have mic'd her up.
Yeah, done it proper.
There's loads of videos on there, but you can't hear anything really, and it's quite. And every time she turns away, so I think it may be filmed on a phone or something. So every time she turned away, you like,
Lost it all together.
and she'd be looking at the painting, and you can't hear her. But I think this is a beautiful picture.
It is.
And here's another seascape. This is in pastels, yachts,
See, that's lovely, isn't it?
That's another one you might.
very impressionist,
Yes, very.
very impressionist. So can you kind of see why I've put Canaletto and Lowry together?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I think you managed to find a
Where's my
good
picture?
connection
Oh,
there
oh.
because day-to-day life really is what encompasses both of them, isn't it?
I don't know why that's moved across. I think it's because of the. Oh.
Beat a nice chimney.
You can't beat a nice chimney.
Well, I just find them absolutely. Now I think because there's no factories really these
Yeah.
days, are
I
there?
need
We
to
don't
just
have big factories.
See if I can do
But
something. I need
look
to
at the
centralise
architecture
this.
of them,
Well,
ones
it's like
that are
Bliss
left.
Mill, isn't it, by Chipping Norton?
Exactly
You
like
know, and
Bliss
you look
Mill.
at that, and that's beautiful,
And I've
isn't
always
it?
loved that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's they really are quite fascinating. And when you go somewhere like Hebden Bridge, where
There we
there's
go.
loads of them, it's just
Yeah.
it's like stepping back in time.
Anything like that.
But there's a lot of similarities, you know. Look, we've got buildings square on, looking down from a height. Lots of towers or chimneys. Figures doing their daily things. It might be a different style.
That's quite interesting putting those two
Yeah,
together.
yeah, the comparisons
Very
between the
interesting.
two, yeah.
And even that,
Oh yes, oh yes.
you know.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Very good idea.
So although, you know, they both painted cityscapes for various reasons. One's to capture the feel of the time in a working class, and the other was to capture the tourism cash and make scenes over accentuated. So you've got Lowry that's doing the dirt and grit,
Yeah, and life in nitty gritty,
and Canaletto is doing it in glorious technicolor, that it's not actual, more of a fantasy Venice rather than a real Venice. So it's interesting how you can create these scenes to give you. And even when he did London as a tourist Venice,
Yeah.
really.
Yes.
So it wasn't
I felt
gritty.
his British pictures were not very satisfactory at all.
No, because it wasn't Venice,
no.
and
It just didn't do it.
no. Although there's a painting of Constable that he did of, I think, Westminster Bridge, with a regatta.
Oh yes,
And
we've
it's
done that one. It's
horrible.
awful. Yes, in the regatta's all mixed.
That was exhibited the same time as that Turner
Yeah, no, I
piece.
remember that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And there's a bridge in
Horrid.
that one as well, isn't there?
Yes.
Like-
Yeah, the bridge going right the way across the middle, and lots of reds and fanfares and boats. No,
Lots
didn't
of
like it
people
at
on
all.
it and everything.
So here we go. There's the end of the lesson
Thank you very much,
today.
Gary. I've got to go.
Yes, I remember you saying. And next time we're looking at Spanish artists.
Spanish.
Spanish.
Spanish artists.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. That was really interesting.